21 years ago, Nintendo released the Nintendo DS, a handheld game console with the unique feature of having two screens. Over the years, the DS and its later iterations have sold over 150 million units. There are many reasons why the DS sold so well, but undoubtedly one of those reasons has to be its extensive and unique catalog of games, many of which were critically acclaimed. There are handheld entries in beloved franchises, cult classics that have carved a name for themselves in niche communities, breakout hits that would launch new series, and even ports of universally acclaimed classic games. There are hundreds of games on the system that have achieved commercial and critical success, but that's true for many different consoles. So what makes the DS library so special and unique? I can't deny that there is a nostalgia factor here, but I can say that the secrets that made DS games so memorable lies within the console itself and how the games released for it utilize the system. So join me on a journey into the wonderful and entertaining world of the Nintendo DS. I need to make a quick disclaimer before we begin. There are over 100 DS games shown off in this video. Maybe. I'm not actually sure how many made it in. I will also be showing some non-DS games in this video. I will be avoiding major spoilers for every single game and minor spoilers for pretty much all of them. The only exception being The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. The game is 2 decades old at this point, but I figured I would still throw the warning in there. I will also always be showing the name of the currently displayed game on screen below the footage, so if any of them look interesting to you, you'll know what to look for. Well, with that out of the way, let's finally begin. As a console, there are many aspects of the DS that set it apart from other systems. There's the obvious ones, like the dual screens, and the touchscreen, as well as some less obvious ones, like the built-in microphone and the clamshell design. Even just being a handheld system sets it apart from home consoles, allowing developers to use it in ways that wouldn't be possible if it was tied to a TV screen. Rather than just sitting here throwing out facts about the console, let's get into how some games made use of these unique features. The dual screens were used by almost every game, which makes sense as it's the main draw of the console. Games could just do something simple like showing information such as a map, to something more complex like having two things happen in tandem, demanding the player pay attention to both screens. Some games would even have gameplay take place across both screens, creating a sense of scale the small screens would otherwise struggle to show. The touchscreen was also often used, sometimes for the entirety of gameplay to just the occasional tap to switch around equipment. But I think some of the best and most unique games are the ones that not only made use of these features, but also made use of them together, or with multiple other features the console had. Take Nintendogs, for example. The touchscreen was used so that you could interact with the dogs, but you could even use the microphone to call commands, or simply call them by name. This created a shockingly personal relationship with these completely fictional animals, a feat that would be impossible on any other console. In Dinosaur King, the touchscreen is used to dig up fossils, but bits of sand and dirt would frequently obscure your workspace. No problem though, just use the built-in microphone and blow the particles away. In the Eternia Odyssey series, the top screen shows your main dungeon crawling gameplay, while the bottom screen is reserved for drawing a map of the dungeon you're currently exploring, which provide an aspect of exploration no other games had. Let me ask you a question. What's something you can do with a handheld console that you can't do with a home console? In Hotel Dusk Room 215, the DS is held sideways, like a book. The top screen shows you a first-person view with the main character Kyle Hyde sees, while the bottom screen shows a top-down map-like view where you use the stylus to control his movement. Where this format really shines, though, in my opinion, is during the conversations. Each character gets their own screen. Glancing between the two screens to read the dialogue boxes really helps sell that you're watching a conversation, rather than just having them both in front of you. In Style Savvy, the DS is held sideways, providing a nice full profile view of the outfit you've put together, something that would be much harder if the DS were held in the traditional manner. The can even have the player switch between the two orientations, like in Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, where the DS is held in a traditional manner, except during certain boss battles, where Bowser grows giant and you have to turn the DS on its side to see the action in its new scale. You can also use the book-style hold to have players read 100 classic novels. Yeah, not sure too many people remember that one. Here's another question for you. How would you solve this puzzle? You're presented with a map with a marker on it, and you're tasked with copying the marker onto your own map. This is a puzzle that The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass asks you to solve on your third expedition into the Temple of the Ocean King. If you're like me when I was younger, your first instinct is probably to just draw it on the map. You'll quickly find that this doesn't work though. Pressing all of the buttons also does nothing, as this game doesn't require any buttons to be pressed. Now, maybe you're getting a little frustrated, and you decide to close your DS and set it aside, thinking you'll get back to it later. When later rolls around, you open up your console and, the puzzle's solved. And then it clicks. The puzzle told you to press down. This was an aspect of the DS's design that I found to be criminally underrated. There's very few games I know of that use this feature, like the stamp puzzle in Trace Memory, where you close the DS to stamp a piece of paper. This is a really interesting use of the hardware that is actually impossible on every other console. I will say I can't exactly blame developers for not using it, as there's very few cases where it would be applicable, and while stamping something like this makes sense, it's also a tad unintuitive, as closing the DS puts it into sleep mode, which suspends the game. Suspending the game doesn't exactly scream, make progress, though I think it's still a very clever use of the console's design. While the DS did eventually have to come to an end with the ever-changing landscape of gaming and technology evolving and improving, death would not come so easily for our favorite little handheld console, as the DS's successor would be the Nintendo 3DS released in 2011, 7 years after the original DS hit the market. The 3DS had every single feature the DS had while bringing technological upgrades and a few new features of its own. This included the titular stereoscopic 3D effect, as well as a circle pad for full 360-degree control a directional pad could not provide. It also contained backwards compatibility for DS games, as well as its own extensive, critically acclaimed catalog. While I love the 3DS and think it's a great follow-up to the DS, it feels like there are less games that make me ask, how would this work on another console? Now, this is an unfair comparison. Because the 3DS is a successor to the DS, anything the DS could have done feels less unique on the 3DS. But there are a few more reasons outside of that I would like to get into. The new features the 3DS brought to the table simply weren't something you could build a game around. Like 3D movies, the best the 3D could do was enhance the experience. There's nothing that uses the 3D that can't be made without it. The circle pad and more powerful system meant that games can be more complicated than the DS, but aren't something other consoles lacked. The 3DS did, however, also introduce a gyro sensor. Through this, in combination with the camera, a feature introduced on the DSi, there were some games that you couldn't play anywhere else, like Chibi Robo Photo Finder, and Spirit Camera, The Cursed Memoir, a spin-off of the Fatal Frame series that used an included booklet you scanned with the camera. It's been years since I've tried any of these, and I've moved multiple times, so I have no idea where any of my AR stuff ended up. Luckily, Nintendo still has replacements that you can download on their website. This is awesome, because I'll hopefully learn about some games I didn't know. Yeah, so this feature never really took off. It's understandable, aside from first-person shooters or really confined exploration mechanics, there's not too much you can do with this. In addition, requiring extra materials to play the game makes it more expensive to produce, even if ever more slightly, and it's just more inconvenient for the user. Factor in that you need to be in a well-lit room for the AR to even work, and that Spirit Camera, the big release to show off the feature, didn't exactly land very well with critics. It's no surprise not many games attempted to follow suit. To be fair, the AR titles listed on Nintendo's website are far from all of them, but there's still only a handful of games that make use of it, and fewer still that are built around it. Most AR features were just minigames or seeing the characters in the real world. It is a bit unfortunate though, as I found Spirit Camera incredibly interesting and charming and would have loved to see what a developer could have done with a more polished product and a similarly great idea. One of the tech upgrades the 3DS brought alongside the stereoscopic 3D was higher resolution screens. However, the top screen had a wider resolution than the bottom screen. As it was the only screen with the 3D effect, it makes sense that they would do this, but that introduced a problem. These two factors combined meant that the dual screen gimmick was almost entirely killed off. Okay, I'm being overly dramatic, but the problem is in order to make use of the better screen and/or the 3D effect, the touchscreen was no longer a viable place for the majority of gameplay to take place. And this had mixed effects that I think is best shown off by existing series that got new entries on the 3DS. Etrian Odyssey, I think, largely benefited from this change. The dungeon exploration already took place on the top screen, so that got some nicely enhanced visuals, while the map drawing on the bottom screen remained largely unchanged. The Professor Layton series had a negative change, though relatively minor. In the previous DS titles, while you solved a puzzle, the instructions were always present on the top screen. In the 3DS entries, however, they wanted to make use of the 3D, so the top screen was given animations related to the puzzles. This is cute, but it places the explanation in this text box, which can be expanded onto either screen. Now, you can just leave it on one of the screens and achieve the same effect, but in that case, it's an extra step that feels wholly unnecessary. Also, if seeing the animation helps you solve it, this is not a viable solution. In addition to the puzzles, exploration is now also done on the top screen, but still controlled on the touch screen, which is a tad more awkward, but admittedly works well enough. Style Savvy, I think, is a very interesting series to look at for this difference. As I mentioned earlier, the original Style Savvy on the DS had you hold the DS sideways. Now, I will admit that I am a total sucker for this. I can't even pretend to be unbiased. It's just a really interesting way to play a game that I've never seen another console do. The 3DS games, however, just have you hold the DS like you traditionally would. This is fine, it works, the games are still good, but it's just less interesting. It doesn't feel so much like a DS game anymore. The DS's sideways orientation really gave the original a unique feel that I'm sad to see was lost in the sequels. But I think The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds illustrates my point the best. Don't get me wrong, I love this game. It's probably a top 3 Zelda for me. But compared to its predecessors, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, there's really nothing about it that makes me ask how would this work outside of the 3DS. The touchscreen is used purely for convenience. To port the game to another console, Nintendo would just need to make an equipment and map menu. It would slightly disrupt gameplay, sure, but the overall experience would remain largely unchanged. Credit where credit is due though, it's one of the only games on the system that I even consider turning the 3D effect on for, so it's at least got that going for it. I think at this point I've talked enough about 3DS games. I could get into some more great games, but then I'd be making this video about the DS and 3DS when really it's just supposed to be about I've talked a lot already about games that are uniquely DS games, but there are plenty of games on the DS that don't need to be. Dragon Quest IX Sentinels of the Starry Sky is, in my opinion, one of the best entries in the Dragon Quest franchise. It's a DS exclusive, but there's nothing about it that really means it has to be. It makes some use out of the touchscreen and the top screen, but nothing about it wouldn't work without those things. It could just as easily be an RPG on any other console. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective plays very well with the touchscreen, but is perfectly playable with buttons, making its port to modern consoles feel right at home. The original 3 Professor Layton games have been ported to mobile, just splitting the screen in two for the top and touchscreen parts. It's not a perfect solution, but it is one that works just fine. However, it's obvious the influence the DS had on the series. The Layton series isn't the only one that's had to compromise its display when porting a game. I haven't had the chance to play this next one, unfortunately, but here is a screenshot from the Castlevania Dominus Collection, a collection of ports of the 3 Castlevania games released on DS. It's a bit awkward looking, right? The collection has reviewed exceedingly well, much like the mobile Layton games, so it obviously hasn't affected the quality of the games. But the DS's influences here are also strong. For reference, here's what Donasaro looks like on DS. The first 3 Etrian Odyssey games have, similarly, also received a port to modern consoles and PC. I have been playing these, and while they work just fine, I can't help but really miss the bottom screen in the moments where I'm drawing the maps. Once again, the DS's influences are strong. In 2024, Another Code Recollection released on the Switch. It's a remake of both Trace Memory and its Wii sequel Another Code R, A Journey into Lost Memories. The game had the daunting task of unraveling the DS's DNA from Trace Memory, a game that, as I already mentioned, made extensive use of the DS's features. This resulted in a lot of puzzles being changed and even some being outright removed. Without the gimmicks baked into the DS, the Switch just isn't capable of reproducing those puzzles. And again, the game scored well, about the same as the original did, so clearly it didn't need the DS, right? The World Ends With You on the DS uses each screen to control different sets of combat at the same time. You press buttons for controlling the top screen and use the stylus for the bottom screen. The game is imported to mobile and the Switch and has received stellar reviews on both, but there's a large portion of the fanbase that recommends people play the original DS version if they get the chance. The ported versions obviously had to adjust the way combat worked, removing the dual screen aspect. Similarly, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors started as a DS game and has since been ported to a variety of other consoles. The ported versions are mostly great. I've heard some bad things about the iPhone version, but all the others work just fine. But the DS version makes great use of the dual screen feature. One screen shows the visuals during story segments, and the other shows a novel-like description of what's happening and what the characters are thinking. The two screens work together to tell a story in a very interesting way that's mostly lost on the new versions. You can swap between the two at will, but you don't get them presented together. There's also something at the end of the game that is a total major spoiler, so I won't get into it, but it does use the dual screens in a very interesting way. Because of this, there are, again, many fans who prefer the DS version, because an element they loved about the game is completely lost without the hardware of the Nintendo DS. Let me ask you yet another question. How would you remake The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass for the Nintendo Switch 2? It's no surprise that a game made by Nintendo would make such incredible use out of their console's hardware. Some of the answers are easy. Instead of controlling Link with the stylus, just have him controlled with the buttons like in any other Zelda game. The ship would have to be fully controllable, as drawing a line on your chart would be clunky and kind of awful with a controller. Maybe there could be an option to use mouse controls, or you could use the touchscreen in handheld mode, but then what about the Pro Controller? And how would you control things like the boomerang and bomb choose? You could make them work like the Beetle and Skyward Sword, make it its own entity that you swap control to when you use it. You could also just make the puzzles no longer feature these crazy angles that sending them straight out would fail to solve. Windmills you have to blow to make spin, or candles you have to blow out, or calling out to get someone's attention would work with the built-in microphone, but what about when it's docked? And what about the puzzles that make you remember a path or a combination? It's simple on the DS, you just jot them down on your map and look up at it while playing, but the Switch 2 doesn't have that luxury. So it could work, but there's lots of problems that would need to be solved. In handheld mode, there would be fewer problems to solve, but would they want to lock the game to that? And either way, at the end of the day, many things would still need to be changed. It's not Phantom Hourglass anymore. Parts of it are still there, the whole from a distance looks complete, but when you look closer, it's different. The DS was unique, maybe to a fault. The games that made ample use of all the little odds and ends that set it apart from other consoles are essentially trapped in the moment of time they were released. Any effort, any attempt to bring these games to modern consoles would require extensive changes to how the game functions, erasing many things that made them unique. But that doesn't mean it's pointless. I'm not saying that all of these games should be stuck on a console long forgotten. They still have a story to tell, they still have pieces that can be carried over that set them apart from other games. While Spirit Tracks couldn't play exactly the same on Switch as it can on DS, it's still the only Zelda game where you control a train. A Pokemon Ranger port might just have you spinning a joystick around, but it still provides a gameplay loop other Pokemon games cannot. We can see this with the Etrian Odyssey games, where drawing the map isn't as smooth and intuitive with a controller, but it's still one of the only games where you draw your own map. And where else could you read 100 classic books? Okay, no, you can do that on a phone actually, that's a bad example. My point is, while bringing these games to a new audience won't give them the quote-unquote full experience, it will let them experience some great classic games. The real problem, I fear, is that this effort would be deemed not worth it. I can't deny making a lot of these changes be time-consuming and expensive. And while I've shown some truly great and unique games, not all of them were exactly commercial successes. Even games that wouldn't require too many changes might lose money trying to obtain a new audience. I wanted to make this video to show off some cool and unique games from the Nintendo DS, so gosh darn it, that is what I'm going to do. I already mentioned 100 classic books, perhaps the greatest DS game ever made, but there's plenty more non-game DS games. Have you ever wanted to learn French? What about Japanese? There's a game for that. Or maybe you want to experience sensationalized points of view of various jobs. There's the Ace Attorney series, where you play as, you guessed it, an attorney. There's also Trauma Center Under the Knife for all you medical drama enthusiasts out there. Or you could take a crack at crime solving and Crime Scene. Keeping on the mystery game train, there's Touch Detective, where you play a young detective solving mysteries in her town. During conversations, her thoughts are displayed on the top screen, which is probably one of the cuter uses of the dual screen. Or you could use the stylus to open Rifts in Time and Time Hollow to try and find your missing parents. If you're looking for something with a little less mystery and a lot more puzzling, the Professor Layton series has you covered. But maybe you're looking for something with a little more action. You could try Cop: The Recruit, an open-world third-person shooter. Kinda like GTA, but if you want GTA, you could just play GTA Chinatown Wars, an entry first released on the DS. If you prefer first-person, there's Moon, a sci-fi shooter taking place on, well, the moon. There's also Metroid Prime Hunters, an entry in the series that included online multiplayer. If you want something that feels a little more classic, you could give Core a try. If you want something more grounded in reality, various Call of Duty games actually made their way to the console. In fact, it actually wasn't too uncommon for console releases to get a DS version, to varying degrees of success. Sonic Colors got a DS entry much more akin to Sonic Rush than its console counterpart. The original Resident Evil got a DS version with a few added tweaks to make use of the console's unique hardware. Tomb Raider Underworld got a DS release, albeit with just a little less dimensions. Even some older, lesser-known console titles like Flower, Sun, and Rain got a home on the DS. While not every downsized console game was great, there are quite a few that are genuinely enjoyable, to the point where some people might argue that they're actually better than their home console counterparts. Though I would be lying if I only showed off good DS games. Like every other console, the DS was not immune to bad games. The obvious ones to look at are the movie tie-in games and games that are essentially just product placement. Like Shrek Super Slam, a game where Shrek and his friends slam into each other, or whatever. Captain America Super Soldier provides you with a rather lackluster experience of being Captain America. Avatar: The Last Airbender got a handful of games, though none of them were particularly memorable. Scooby-Doo had a similar situation, a few games, but nothing of note to really say about any of them. I think it's important to clarify here that if you do like some of these bad or mediocre games, there's nothing wrong with that. There's a number of games that I have mentioned throughout this video that aren't the best, but I still thoroughly enjoyed. Except M&M's Kart Racing. That game is just not very good. One thing I loved about the DS is just how many casual and beginner-friendly games it had. Like the non-game games, a lot of these types of games have moved on to smartphones, but seeing as the DS was released before the first iPhone, developers found a home for them on this little dual-screen console. I've already briefly shown a few, such as Nintendogs, Animal Crossing Wild World, which likely needs no further introduction, and Cooking Mama, a game that lets you try your hand at cooking various dishes. But there were plenty of other casual games, such as Hi Hamtaro Ham Ham Challenge and WarioWare Touch, two games that were a collection of mini-games. Mario games have historically been for players of all ages, and that's no different here. New Super Mario Bros., Mario Party DS, and various Mario sports games are great fun for all ages. Even Princess Peach got in on the action. Kirby also got a few DS games, all of which are incredibly accessible platformers for players of all ages and skill levels. Similarly, various LEGO games also made their way to the platform. Casual games are fun and all, but maybe you're looking for a more hardcore, mature experience. Here's a fun fact about the DS. There were only 11 M-rated games released for the console, and I've actually already mentioned half of them, so I'll just briefly go over the rest. Dementium the Ward and its sequel Dementium 2 are two survival horror games developed by Renegade Kid, the same developer behind the aforementioned Moon. The first game started as a Silent Hill game, but the pitch was turned down by Konami. Ultimate Mortal Kombat is a DS port of Mortal Kombat 3 with MK Puzzle Combat included. Touch the Dead is an on-rail shooter where you shoot zombies by, well, touching them. Thaurissia is a psychological horror game where you play as a girl who has lost her memories and is trying to escape a labyrinth while not dying to the traps that lie within. And finally, Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey is an RPG in which you explore a mysterious void that is opened up on the South Pole. And while we're on the topic of RPGs, the DS was home to plenty of them. Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor is another spin-off in the SMT series, though unlike Strange Journey, Devil Survivor is a tactical RPG with gameplay control on a grid. Pokemon got a number of entries, both mainline like Pokemon Black and White, and spin-off like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue Rescue Team. There were also remakes of Pokemon Gold and Silver. Digimon also got an entry in Digimon World Dawn and Dusk. Heck, Sonic even got an RPG developed by BioWare. Now if action RPGs are more to your liking, the DS had quite a few of those as well, Avalon Code is a game in which you record various people, plants, weapons, and other objects in the Book of Prophecy, which lets you gather information about them and create new things. Summon Night Twin Age, a game following two siblings of different races, as you use a touchscreen to hack and slash your way at enemies. Lunar Nights, a game produced by Hideo Kojima, follows two characters on a quest to defeat various vampire bosses. And of course, there were plenty of remakes and ports of older games, such as Chrono Trigger, a time-traveling RPG originally on the SNES. Dragon Quest V, Hand of the Heavenly Bride, was another remake of an SNES RPG, making it the first time the game was available in English. Kirby Superstar Ultra was a remake of the SNES game Kirby Superstar, adding a handful of new modes for players to experience. Super Mario 64 DS was a remake of Super Mario 64, adding more characters and stages than the original Nintendo 64 version. Diddy Kong Racing DS was a remake of the N64's Diddy Kong Racing, with a slightly updated roster to account for Rare's acquisition. And Sonic Classic Collection was a collection of 4 classic Sonic games from the Sega Genesis. Wow, that was a lot in a short amount of time. The crazy thing is, there are a number of games I haven't even shown yet that I think are worth mentioning. Like the Nameless game, a game released exclusively in Japan that revolves around a cursed RPG game. This game makes great use of the DS's unique hardware, but perhaps I should let you discover them for yourself. If you've enjoyed this brief dive into the world of the DS, I highly encourage you to look further into the matter. There are a ton of games that I only show glimpses of, and more games that I still haven't shown that are worth exploring. The DS has so many interesting and unique games, along with admittedly a few duds, and I wish I had all the time in the world to fully explore all of them. But getting just the brief amount of footage in this video took a week. So I'm going to call it quits here. I do hope you've enjoyed, and let me know your personal favorite DS game. Thank you for watching.